What's up everyone, and welcome to another Blender VJ Loop tutorial. Today we're going to recreate this looping hexagon sun animation inspired by the music of Boards of Canada. If you haven't heard of these guys, I suggest you check out their music. The program we're going to be using is called Blender, which is an open source 3D application which can be downloaded for free. I'll be leaving a link in the description. And if you want to grab the project file for this particular scene, you can find that on my website. I'll be leaving a link in the description for that too. And consider support me on Pateron, where you'll be granted instant access to all my tutorial project files, along with other exclusive benefits. Right, with that out of the way, let's get on with the tutorial. So yeah, let's start with a blank scene. Delete the default cube, of course. Hit Shift A. We'll add a mesh, and we're going to add a cylinder. And we're going to get that hexagon shape by just changing the vertices here to 6. Next step, we're going to go into edit mode, so hit Tab. Go to face select here. And we're going to delete the faces so we can just see through the object. So hit X, delete faces on each side. Hit RX90, and now we're going to get our camera and we're just going to position this quickly. So hit Alt G to reset the location, and we're going to hit Alt R to reset the rotation. And then we're going to hit RX90 so we can face it down so it's facing along the hexagon. So G, Y, and then just bring it out a bit here. And then if you hit 0, you can see the hexagon shape here. Next step, we're going to go to our modifier with the cylinder selected. I'm just going to rename that hexagon or hex, whatever you want. And we're going to add a modifier, and we're going to add an array modifier. And this is how we're going to get that sort of honeycomb effects that you can see. So we're just going to pump this count up to about 20. Because as you can see on my animation, we're sort of rotating around the hexagon, around the honeycomb shape. And you just want to have more sort of hexagons to work with. Otherwise, if you start going a bit crazy with the rotations, you're going to run out of hexagons within the camera. So just give yourself a few to work with. I'm just going to go with 20. So if you're following along, just do what I do. So yeah. Right. So add a modifier. We're going to add the Solidify Modifier just to thicken it up a bit. Pump the thickness up so we can extrude it in. Let's apply these. So make sure you're happy with what you've done. There's not really going to be much going back after we apply these. So just hit Control A on the modifier and then Control A again on the Solidify modifier. That applies it. So now it's one object. Apply your transforms, sorry. So apply all transforms. Control A, apply all transforms. I just want to zoom in a bit because we need to be precise when we're duplicating this up. Basically, we're going to fill it up the Z-axis, yeah? So you could do an array modifier and just do it like... You could just do it like that, but that doesn't really look like a honeycomb, does it? Like honeycombs, it looks cool. It's an interesting pattern, but they sort of join where the crevices are. It's actually the most efficient form of geometry. We're not going to do that, but you can if you want to have your own pattern and have something a bit different to mine. That will look cool as well, but we're going to do it like this. So go to front view, hit Shift D, lock onto the Z-axis, and I'm going to hold Control just so it snaps. As you can see, it snaps up. So we want it to snap to around there-ish. And I'm just going to hide my camera because it's getting in the way. And I'm going to get rid of this light. I don't need this light here, so I'm going to delete that. And we're just going to sort of eyeball it. So we're going to hit G and then X. Hold Control again so it snaps to the grid. It doesn't snap perfectly there, I think, because the hexagonal cylinder doesn't fall precisely, sort of falls in between. So you can just zoom in a bit further and you can hit G, X, and then hold Control again. Just zoom right on in. You can hold Shift as well. It might just be my eyes deceiving me because there's no grid lines, but I don't feel like that's straight. But it doesn't really matter too much, to be honest. That looks fine. I'm overthinking it. So with that done, let's put our overlays back on. Select both of these, and we're going to hit Shift D, hit Z again, so you lock onto the Z axis, and then hold Control. And again, just eyeball it up so it aligns. If you hold Control, it should perfectly snap. And now with that done, just hit Shift R. Hitting Shift R, it basically repeats the last function that you did, and it just makes populating the whole thing a lot easier. So I'm just going to do that again and not click out of it this time. So Shift D, Z, hold Control, snap that there, zoom out, sorry. Now hit Shift R, Shift R, Shift R, and just fill it up till it looks fairly even. Go to your outliner and just hold Shift and select all of these, and we're going to hit Control J, and that's going to join them all together. Now we're going to go to Object here, and we're going to go Set Origin to Geometry, and that's going to put the origin point of the object. It's quite hard to see, but that orange dot, that's basically the center point of the object. So it's sort of the pivot point. So when you rotate it, it's now going to rotate from the center of the object. And now we can just hit Alt-G, and that's going to bring the object perfectly to the center. Now let's bring our camera back. So that's that. We're going to hit 0. That brings us to camera modes. And now you can see we can do all sorts of things with this. So you could play around like that. You could instance it and just have an animation of like hexagons that go on forever. That would be pretty cool. But we're going to do the one that I created. Let's get started with shading the project. So I'm just going to save what I got because we're going to start shading. So this is always a good checkpoint to save, I think. I'm going to just leave it at 1080p. I'll up it to 30 frames per second. So we're going to hit Z and then 8. That takes you into render mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually use a HDRI to light the scene. So I've actually bought this plugin. It's called Pro Lighting Skies. It's a really good HDRI package for Blender because it's all integrated with Blender, and they have like loads of different sort of HDRIs that you can just easily access within. I find it really useful, and it's got some nice parameters that you can play with. But it is a paid for add-on. I think I paid like 100 quid for it. I can't remember. Maybe not 100 quid. I bought it like a year ago. I can't really remember. I remember it being, I don't know. But anyway, I'm not expecting you guys to buy this. You can use any HDRI. You can just go to HDRI Haven. I'm going to go with one of these online because obviously you guys don't have this plugin. So better for you guys to follow along. Do you know what I mean? But I do recommend this plugin if you don't mind forking out a bit of money for it. Because it's got so many cool options. And you can also, you see it's got this black bit at the bottom. You can actually go over here and you can mirror it. So you got a perfectly mirrored HDRI, which is what I did for this. And then you can also change the horizon levels as well, which is really cool. So you can just get this perfect sort of sky that you can just sort of use. I don't know, I'm sort of rambling, but yeah, I think it's a really cool plugin. I'm not affiliated with these developers, by the way. I just think it's a cool add-on. Yeah, I'm going to try do it without, just so you guys can follow on. Let's find a... Did they change the name of this? I haven't been on this website since I bought that plugin, so yeah. Anyway, there's loads of free stuff on here, if it is the same website, that you can just download and use. So I want to go for one with loads of clouds. I don't want a clear sky. I want a lot of definition to the clouds. I quite like this one. This is quite a good one, I think. Right, anyway, let's go into the shader editor. Just have a play around with it anyway. We want to go to world here, so we change the world settings. See this this node group, you're not going to have that. This is basically from this Pro Lighting Skies. Let's uncheck that. We'll add an environment texture. We'll plug that in, and let's open up that HDRI that we just had. So what we can do, make sure you got Node Wrangler installed. So go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons. You should always have this add-on installed. It comes with Blender. All you've got to do is just search it here, Node Wrangler. It just makes working in this shader editor so much easier. So with that enabled, we can just click on this, hit Control-T. That will let you sort of play around with scalings and things like that. I wanted to mirror this. I think you can maybe mix it with like the same texture. I'm just sort of improvising here because I wasn't planning to use one of these HDRIs. So add a mix shader, plug these in together, and then if we have one on that side and then rotate it 180 degrees, that should flip it. So then when you mix them together, obviously they're going to fade together. So that's not going to look very good. You need something to control that. So maybe a gradient texture with the factor, I think. So we'll hit F3, gradient texture, plug the FAC into the FAC here. And if anyone knows a quicker way to do this or a better way, just drop it in there. So yeah, gradient texture, add a color ramp. I thought that would work. Maybe linear. Yeah, but it's the wrong way. So again, Control T, we'll go with object, -90, and then just bring this color ramp out. Yeah, there you go. We want to get rid of basically the floor. We want like a 360 view of the sky. So let's bring that color ramp in, and I think that's the best I can do. Yeah, that'll do. All right, I kind of worked it out. You still got these airplanes, but Do you know what? We're only going to have the camera really facing in one way. So yeah, have a look at that. So what you need is 2 of the same HDRIs, and you want to add a mapping coordinate on each one, with one of them rotated 180 degrees on the x-axis. Probably work on the y as well. So you basically have one. Basically, you have 2 different objects upside down, and then you just need to plug a gradient texture on linear gradient type and feed it into the color ramp so that you can crunch it in and really control where that gradient sort of cuts in. Add another mapping coordinate and just sort of play around with this rotation. For me, all I had to do was negate it 90 degrees on the y-axis, and that seems to have worked. There is probably a way you can bring that horizon level down, but I don't know how you do it. So anyway, let's go back to actually building the scene. So cool. So we got this sort of hexagon effect. Now I've rotated it down the y-axis. I shouldn't have done that, because now when I have my camera, I'm going to be seeing all these bushes and aeroplanes. So let's change this. So I'm going to rotate this RX90. I'm going to hit Control A, apply all transforms, and we're going to have the camera going down, just facing down the z-axis. Okay, so I'm going to hit Alt G again and then Alt R just to reset the location and rotation. I'm going to hit G, Z, and bring that camera up, and there we go. Let's bring this camera just down a bit, and let's widen up that focal length. I think about 18mm focal length is good, and we're going to bring that in again. Just play around with the color management settings. So we're going to be doing this in Eevee, in the render engine. We're going to enable bloom. That's going to be for when we add the sun behind all these hexagons. It's going to really create this sort of glowing effect that sort of blooms through the honeycombs. It's going to look quite cool. We're going to add screen space reflections, because these honeycombs are going to, I don't know why I keep calling them honeycombs. These hexagons are going to just basically reflect the sky around it. Go back to here, we're going to add motion blur, go to color management, change it to very high contrast. I'm going to pump up the exposure to 1. I'm going to drop the gamma down to 0.8. This looks horrible at the moment. I kind of wish I went for a different HDRI now. Let me just change some of these settings. So we're going to go with hue saturation. I'm just going to remove this for now, just so I can see what it's doing on 1. So this will allow you to change the color of your HDRI, and you can also change some of these values. So we can sort of bring that value down. I'm going to keep that back there. Just going to duplicate that, and I want to look at it through the camera. Let's make it a sort of turquoise color. Remember, we're going by, well, I was going by these guys' artwork. It's very sort of turquoise sort of theme. So we're going to go with that. Let's bring it to that kind of color. Pump up saturation. We're just going to duplicate these across. So Shift D, because obviously there's 2 HDRIs now. So put that in. Great. So with that done, let's start shading this sort of honeycomb thing. So we've, well, I don't know why it's doing that. I'm not even clicking it. That was weird. Right, go to your shader editor, change this to object, and we're going to pump up the metallic, and we're going to drop the roughness down. And as you can see, it's sort of reflecting all of these clouds now. I think it looks pretty cool. And now we're going to drop that specular down as well. We don't need any of that. We are now going to go back to our hexagon, go to the modifier properties. We're going to add a modifier, and we're going to add a wireframe modifier, and we're going to uncheck replace original. So it adds the wireframe over the mesh. We just want to bring some definition to the hexagons, right? So we're going to be basically creating outlines with the wireframe modifier. So we're going to change the material offset to 1. Originally, this hexagon, the wireframe is taking the material of the whole hexagon of this slot. What that material offset does is it basically assigns the wireframe to the next slot. So if we add a new slot, hit add new, now the wireframe, we can have full control over that wireframe material. So let's just bring this down to black, and now we got this kind of cool sort of outline effect on the hexagons. Let's add the sun now. So we're going to hit Shift A, add a mesh, and we're going to add an icosphere. Give it about 5 subdivisions, and we're going to bring this down. So hit G, Z, bring it all the way down here. Let's scale it fairly high. I think that looks pretty cool. We're just going to add a new material to this icosphere, and we're going to basically make a sun in the background. Change this to an emission shader, and we're going to make it sort of deep orange, and we're going to pump that strength all the way up. I think 100 is good, and now you've got this sort of sun sort of beaming through, and the bloom is what's giving it that beautiful glow. And the fact that we got very high contrast on the color management, that's what's really making it pop as well. If you brought it down, it doesn't look as good in my opinion. So to really make things pop, you want to be playing around with these settings here. So let's bring this down a bit, I think, and then we can play around with the hexagons as well. So let's key in some animations. I'm just going to save what I got. So bring your timeline up. Going to set that set to 30 frames per second. Let's make it a 10-second loop. So we'll make the end 300 frames. Go to your hexagon, and on the scale, we're going to add a keyframe on the Z-axis on the first frame. We're going to duplicate that. So hit Shift D, bring that all the way to the end, but you want it to be on 301. Because if you have it on 300, it's not going to loop properly. We're making seamless loops. Basically, what will happen is it will end up rendering out a duplicate frame. So if you have it at 300, your last frame is going to be the exact same as your first frame. So when you try loop it, it's going to seem like it stutters. It's going to be very subtle, but it's going to be noticeable. It will seem like the loop's glitching a bit, but it's not. It's just because you've rendered a duplicate frame. So make sure that's set to 301. So we got the exact same scaling on both of these. So go to the middle, and let's just pump that up to like here. I like it cutting precisely there where the corner is. So yeah, hit A, T. Make sure you set this to Bezier because we want the animation to sort of smooth out as it goes in and out. Right, it's a bit boring though, isn't it? So let's spice it up a bit. So we've got our camera here. Let's set a control point for the camera to sort of orbit around. We're going to use an empty to do this. So we're going to hit Shift A, add an empty, and we'll just add an empty sphere. Select our camera, hold Control, then select the empty. Hit Control P, set parent to object, keep transform. And now when you rotate the empty, it's going to rotate the camera. So it always locks onto the empty. So if you can see what I'm on about here. If we start rotating that empty, you can get these really cool sort of movements here. Let's turn these overlays off. I'm going to just expand the empty, and I'm going to just move this camera just so it's slightly off center. Maybe around here, maybe move it on the X a bit as well. Now we can start rotating this empty, say on the Y-axis and on the Z-axis. So you could do a full rotation on the Z-axis. That could be your looping animation, right? So let's just key this in, yeah? So we're gonna go to the first frame, add a keyframe on the Z-axis, hold Shift, hit right arrow, go to 301, hit the arrow again, so you go to 301, we'll hit 360 on this, and then we'll add a keyframe there. Now if we hit A and T, set the interpolation to linear, because we want it to be a full 360 degree rotation. If you have it set to Bezier, which is what Blender does by default, it's going to sort of accelerate and decelerate. You want it to be like one circular motion, do you know what I mean? So make sure you change that interpolation. But then you can also play around with this X one now as well. Sort of, let's go on the X, add a keyframe. We'll set this to 0. We don't want to do a full 360 degree rotation on that, because if you do, you're probably going to clip through the hexagons. So don't do a full 360 degree rotation on that one. Have it so that the first frame is at 0 and the last frame is at 0. And then we'll go to 151, sorry. And we'll just move this like, I don't know, like here. Add a keyframe. Let's see how that looks. Looks pretty decent. So remove the black lines. Yeah, we can remove the black lines. So it's just the wireframe modifier. You have full control over it as well. You can really pump it up if you want to do something like that. Or you can just have none. That looks pretty cool as well. I just think it looks a bit plain. I don't know. It does look pretty cool. Just a different style, I guess, isn't it? I'll leave that to you guys to play around with, honestly. Just so you guys know, if you're not aware, I release like 3 VJ loops every week. You have 2 days to download them for free. It includes the Blender project files as well. If you miss them, they go onto my shop where you can buy them. That's just a way you can support me if you want to have access to like older project files that I've been working on. But yeah, so feel free to have a browse on my website. Who knows? But you can change them as well. Like we've got full control over the material, so you could give it a more sort of pink color or like orange, like sort of blend in with the sun a bit more. That looks pretty dope. I do like that. That's the thing, you just got to play around with things until you like them, right? You can play with the sun as well. It doesn't have to be orange. It can be whatever you want. But what I wanted to show you as well is we're gonna throw it into the compositor and play around with some of the filters on there, because you can really, I don't know what these filters that I always use do, but they do create some interesting effects if you just slap them on sometimes. So don't expect me to explain the ins and outs of them, because I don't actually know what they're doing. But yeah, I'll show you what they look like anyway. So we're gonna have to render out one frame. So hit F12 and go to compositing. We're gonna go to use nodes, and this is going to basically allow us to do some post editing to the render. So hit Shift A, go to Output, Viewer. This is going to allow us to view the render that we just rendered out. This is important because you need to be able to see what you're editing. So plug that in. I'm going to hold Shift and hold right click and just connect these two together. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add a distort, and I'm going to add a lens distortion. Just going to pop that there in between, and we're going to pump up the dispersion to about 3.3, and we'll pump up the distortion to about 1, just so it sort of warps around. It sort of gives you the illusion that the I said that I didn't know what the nodes do. This is pretty obvious. It's lens distortion. It's sort of distorting the lens. It's in the name, right? It's the other ones I don't really know what they do, but yeah, this is cool because it sort of warps it and makes it, the flat plane of hexagons sort of appear to be spherical when they're not. So when you render it out, it's going to sort of look like it's got a bit more curvature to the object. So yeah, add that node. I think it looks good, and it sort of adds some sort of like RGB separation to the ends as well, which I think looks really cool. And then what you want to do is hit Shift A, add a filter nodes, and these are the ones that I was talking about. You can just throw them on, and they look crazy, man. Look at that. That's insane. Yeah, do you know what I mean? You don't even have to have it on full, just sort of like mid. And yeah, like it can really just spruce it up and give you like an unexpected result that looks good. So sometimes if I have a design, I'll just slap this on just to see what it looks like. And yeah, like 80% of the time it looks pretty decent. So yeah, you got Sobel Pruitt. Sorry if I'm butchering these names, but yeah, when you render it out, it's gonna look pretty mad, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, but the only problem with the compositor is it's not real time, so you can't just scrub through and see what it looks like. You have to render out a frame again. Yeah, thanks for joining me, guys. Let's just render out the animation now. So what you want to do, you want to go to render properties. We've set it to 30 frames per second. Just change your output to wherever you want the render to go. Right, so yeah, name your file, find a place to send it. I wouldn't put it in the TMP folder. I'd always specify a path you want it to send to. And then really, you should be rendering out in PNG sequences. That is how you should, but I want to see instant results. So I'm going to set it to FFmpeg video. Let's do it like this. MP4, H.264, Output quality, you want that exceptionally lossless. And yeah, let's render it out. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something new from this. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content, and consider supporting me on Patreon to help me achieve my goal of making this my full-time job. All patrons will have instant access to tutorial project files. Alternatively, you can find them on my website, which I'll be leaving a link to in the description of this video. And on that note, feel free to browse my website where you can find more of my work, Blender project files, and stream the music I make. That's netmotion.co.uk.